this first Friday forum. My name is Jonathan Russell, and I am the former executive director of Hourglass, and now with Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh. But thankfully, they've allowed me to come back and host this forum. So very happy to be here. We just want to thank our sponsor, Rogers and Associates, for these forum series. So appreciate their support as we continue to provide these events throughout the pandemic and throughout the year to come. Also want to thank Millersville University and the Ware Center, which is where we would be if it were not for COVID, but appreciate their support and working with them in the past. But before this is exciting stuff. We've got Grant Ervin from the City of Pittsburgh. He is the Chief Resiliency Officer and the Assistant Director of Planning for the City of Pittsburgh, and he's here to talk to us about resiliency in cities. And I won't take any more of his time, except to say, excuse me, that if you want to submit questions, you can do so at the question and answer function at the bottom of your screens. I'll be monitoring them throughout, and then when we get to the end of Grant's presentation, we can go ahead and address those. Want to keep your questions to the end. So without further ado, Grant, I'll let you take over.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate it. Just a little housekeeping item. I have about 30 to 40 minutes or so. Is that where you wanted?
Yeah, about at the 12:45 mark is when we like to switch over to questions, or 12:40, 12:45, around there. And,
okay.
If you don't go that far, don't worry, I'll have some of my own. So
okay.
We'll be all right.
All right, perfect. Well, I appreciate it, and really excited to talk with everyone from Lancaster and the central Pennsylvania area. I tell everyone that Lancaster is my second favorite city in the state of Pennsylvania, behind my own hometown here, the city of Pittsburgh, and really look forward to having the opportunity to get back to Lancaster in the near future. In fact, we did a great event a couple weeks ago on the SDGs with the team from Millersville, and there was talk about going to the Lancaster Central Market for lunch, which immediately made me salivate. So looking forward to that in my future. I wanted to spend some time, and thanks to the opportunity from Jonathan and the Hourglass Foundation, to share with you all a little bit about our work with regards to resilience building activities in the city of Pittsburgh and what has become known as our ONEPGH initiative. So over the course of the next few minutes, I'm going to run through a little bit about kind of the journey that we've been on over the last 5-6 years in terms of establishing an urban resilience program in Pittsburgh, as well as some of the things that we're looking to pivot towards in the future. And really, this work kind of just a quick message on behalf of my boss and mayor of the city of Pittsburgh, Bill Peduto. We've been on this journey for some time in Pittsburgh, really finding new ways in which to collaborate around civic innovation. And what we've felt that we've been at the precipice of isn't anything new, but a new way to kind of build an urban, a new paradigm of urban initiatives and rethinking kind of our cities and the partnerships that are required to help address many age-old problems, but also find new ways in which to address them through innovation. We have done, like many cities, a number of kind of plans and initiatives over time that have helped to, on the physical side, help chart a course for a new form of development, from open space to district scale planning, but also looking at some of the challenging social issues in addition to those economic issues that Pennsylvania cities, as well as cities across the Ohio Valley and the Upper Great Lakes region, have suffered from because of economic transition or deindustrialization. And so when we came into office and the responsibility of stewarding the course of growth and development in the city of Pittsburgh, we took a deep look at both what was already existing, but also kind of understanding what needs to help change with regards to how we make investments, how we operate city government, and the role that city governments play in terms of charting the course of the future of their cities. And one of the things that we noticed was going way back to 1908, And it's not like a once upon a time story here, but Pittsburgh was a part of a fundamental effort that helped to chart the course of the social service and humanities. And a piece of work called the Pittsburgh Survey was undertaken by the Russell Sage Foundation. And that piece of work really started to chart the course for Pittsburgh of the 20th century. And we felt at the point in time that we were at, there was an opportunity to kind of rethink what Pittsburgh could look like in the 21st century. And so with the advent of kind of our administration, we saw this opportunity to have some deep conversations with our residents and our fellow neighbors about what Pittsburgh could look like in the future, and some of the challenges that we were suffering from, both in terms of economic as well as those social challenges. And so we began this process of resilience planning through a partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities initiative. And that process for us undertook in partnership with the Rand Corporation and the Pittsburgh Rand Corporation office, allowed us to create, in many cases, a second Pittsburgh survey that has allowed us to investigate the shocks and stresses that the city faces, that I will go into in a little bit, and what we're doing to help address those shocks and stressors. It's also allowed us to take deep dives into the issues of equity, and the challenges between both gender equity and racial equity and how they play out in the public policy space. And also kind of help shape new frameworks that are available to us, like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, that help align and intersect many of these different aspects together. We began with a foundational framework that we call P4, which stands for People, Planet, Place, and Performance, as a guidepost for us to guide, effectively lead our initiative so that everything engages the people, takes great responsibility with the place we call home or our communities, that we're responsible stewards for the planet, and that we measure our progress over time in terms of the performance, whether that's making progress or not making progress, so that we can allow to make those adjustments. In the creation of our ONEPGH strategy, we've identified 10 critical areas that you see there to the right of the word topics, that have been kind of our focal points of investment. Some of those can be made inside of city government. Some of those must be made within the civic sector or private sector, and requires cross-sector collaboration to make those possible. We've utilized the Sustainable Development Goals chartered by the United Nations at a local level to help guide kind of our work across these areas of resilience building. So understanding the intersections of poverty and hunger, and the importance of creating just institutions or building partnerships, and how these different sustainable development goals weave together. And with that, we've identified 47 critical projects that can help build the resilience of the city, our ability to adjust and address both stressors, long-standing challenges, as well as immediate shocks that the city faces. And we've also kind of benchmarked our performance against 80 indicators of inequity that we've identified in the city of Pittsburgh. We've done this through a number of strategic partnerships, both local partners as well as national and international partnerships, like the Brookings Institution or the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative, that have helped us build capacity within the realms of city government, as well as our partners in the other sectors, to help develop these deep dives of understanding what challenges we face, but just as importantly, what are the strategic moves or decisions that we can make to help allay or address some of those challenges that the community faces. We've also fostered what we consider a deep system of accountability, of intersecting our ONEPGH resilience strategy with those P4 kind of guidelines, as well as the sustainable development goals. And what that does is allow us to look at both kind of local systems of accountability, as well as how we partake in a larger global initiative. So playing those, making that local to global or global to local connection. When I talked about some of those initial evaluations we developed, we, for the first time, created Pittsburgh's first preliminary resilience assessment, or we call it the PRA. And this was our first evaluation of those shocks, those immediate negative impacts or stressors, the slow moving challenges that the community faces. Typically, community planning processes, look at more of a what I would call positive vision and trajectory. This resilience planning takes kind of a first step at looking at what are some of those dark challenges that a community faces. What are the things that can and will go wrong? So very much a risk management a lens in terms of what are things that need to improve in a community. And that's one of the things that we constantly keep in mind, that this is a pathway of continuous improvement. From the beginnings of the establishment of P4 to the creation of our preliminary resilience assessment and subsequent strategies, we have really been in an additive mode. So kind of creating these building blocks of understanding where the challenges are, developing strategies, doing deeper analysis and targeting kind of where resources lie. And that's resulted in the creation of what we recently announced called the ONEPGH Fund, which is effectively a 501c3 organization that is geared to create cross-sector collaboration. Just as, one of the things that we had identified, I should go back, is one of our primary stressors was the issue of fragmentation. And that is typically seen in a government lens, is that we have many different layers of government, but it's also fragmentation amongst the private sector and the nonprofit sector. And so how do we start to really think about aligning and integrating resources in order to create greater amounts of co-benefits or multi-attributional success across the project? And that's the real focus of the ONEPGH Fund that we have created, to start to bring those investments together in a way that is much more coordinated, but also strategically aligned with our P4 values and the needs that were identified in our preliminary resilience assessment. Another moment on the SDGs. One of the key things, and this goes to our performance P, when we completed the development of our resilience strategy, we were looking for a method to help build a framework of accountability. And the resilience strategy was a deep kind of effort to look across sectors and very multi-dimensional. And so the SDGs were a very nice fit for us to do that. And so what we've been able to do is effectively create the first, and we're in the process of developing our second, what is called voluntary local review. We're basically taking the work that we've done within our resilience strategy and now benchmarking it to the SDGs to measure our progress over time. So understanding kind of how well we're doing in alleviating poverty, or how many advances are we making in affordable and clean energy, and also looking at ways in which the goals can help foster deeper, more meaningful collaboration. So for example, our second voluntary local review this year will focus on city procurement and looking at where our collective spend is going with regards to investment and how we can better leverage that to create more co-benefits across sectors from city resources. There's a lot of value with regards to this in terms of thinking about the intersections with the SDGs and local resilience strategies. The opportunity to think about how we can better attract and allocate resources, how we can demonstrate progress over time, as I had mentioned, but also at the end of the day, it's about how do we encourage improved service delivery to the residents of the city of Pittsburgh. And so we've gone through this mapping exercise of taking those kind of research reports that we've developed and strategies and start to measure each of our activities against each of the 17 global goals. So we've been criticized for having too many frameworks. And so I've kind of run through many of them quickly here. But each framework has a purpose for us. So it's not that they sit in isolation, but they work together in terms of establishing different scales and different intents. So for example, the SDGs are a great tool for us, as I mentioned, to help foster cross-sector collaboration and connect to a global context in terms of how your city is working in its own little corner of the world, but how it ties to kind of bigger objectives. Our ONEPGH work is really kind of our citywide strategy. P4 is really kind of our core values. And so how do we kind of allow those values to permeate across the different work that we do? We've created the Equality Indicators, which was a partnership with the City University of New York and the Rockefeller Foundation, as well as 4 other cities, to really create a targeted measurement system that hones in on the issues of racial inequality. And so that allows us to help really focus where investments can go to help build greater capacity and address issues of inequity. We've also developed targeted strategies around climate action planning, which is really focused on emissions reduction. And I'm going to start to kind of draw some of those parallels and connection in the next few slides with regards to equity and climate and some of those impacts. And we've also been able to do it at the neighborhood scale. So how this really manifests itself in where people live. So when you think about city development or urban development, many times we think about it in the context of neighborhoods or districts. And so that's the lens in which people think about where they live effectively, and how do we start to apply those at a real local scale. From a climate action planning standpoint, I wanted to kind of focus in on this as a key component, because climate action was one of the key issues or primary issues that residents had identified through our community engagement efforts as being a critical challenge that is being faced by the city. In many instances, it was an issue that was raised as, oh, climate change is happening and this is affecting us, but it's the impacts of weather, it's the impacts of utility costs. And so a lot of the kitchen table types of conversations that we all typically have manifest themselves up in kind of this larger issue with regards to fostering climate action. So we began to kind of measure primarily first from a mitigation standpoint in terms of the reduction of CO2, where we can reduce emissions, but also create economic benefit. And so this little pie chart that you see here is where emissions come from in terms of the city of Pittsburgh. So the majority of our emissions come from buildings, about 80% or so, and then 17 to 18% come from transportation, and then waste makes up the majority. With that, we were able to start to set targeted goals with regards to tackling those emissions reduction, and a climate action plan strategy that focuses in on where and how we can effectively address emissions reduction. So you see here some of our 2030 goals with regards to city operations, as well as kind of citywide aspirations with regards to energy and water use and transportation emissions reduction. We recently also, as part of an executive order that the mayor released on Earth Day of this year, have set a carbon neutrality target for the city of Pittsburgh, which is a deep ambition that we're in the process of modeling and working towards achieving. What's also interesting, though, is that we found through our resilience strategies that these issues of climate and equity intersect and cannot be thought of as separate challenges, but really integrated. And so the issues of climate and justice are really interwoven amongst each other. And we first started to see this with our work, and you've seen some of this earlier with our Pittsburgh Equity Indicators, which really gave us, again, kind of a targeted focus on some of the deep issues where inequity exists, and also how that intersects with the environment. Top challenging issues such as childhood health and well-being, affordable housing affordability and stability, and neighborhood composition and opportunity were recognized as we combed through the data, both statistical as well as anecdotal, and started to understand that these are the places where we were seeing the greatest amount of disparity between African-American populations and the white population in Pittsburgh. And so this has given us kind of a great insight in terms of how we can direct policy as well as investment decisions. And so we've started to map that. And, over the next couple of slides I want to share is, topics of discussion that have been effectively existing in isolation and not seen in a very integrated way. So this map here, the areas in pink effectively denote areas of environmental justice, which is, frankly, the majority of the city of Pittsburgh, as well as some outlying areas. And then the small print there on the side, apologies for that, but those are the issues like air quality and utility burden, blood lead levels, and asthma and hospitalization rates as a result of asthma that are being experienced disproportionately by populations. And this is a result of a couple of intersecting issues. Air quality, for example, is a hot topic in and across the city of Pittsburgh and the region, historically, as a result of an industry and transportation systems. But one of the things that we've started to notice when we look at it from a climate lens, in addition to an equity lens, is that we've also experienced not just large swings in temperature, but we've also seen an increasing amount of what are called inversions, which are high pressure air systems that sit over low pressure air systems, effectively trapping pollution in a specific geography. And so those rates or days of inversion events have increased, which thus increases the amount of pollution that gets trapped within the region. And this impacts health impacts such as asthma and hospitalization rates related to asthma. It also increases the number of heat island event days where we see increasing temperatures in the urban footprint. And so these things start to weave together. We've also seen, as a result of some data analysis, increases in the annual rates of precipitation in Pittsburgh. And this is having a deep effect on city operations, on land use patterns and practices, and the operations of infrastructure. So in 2018 and 2019, for example, we've seen an exponential increase in the amount of precipitation, which has also exacerbated flooding and landslides that disproportionately affect vulnerable populations. So this is just a quick indicator of our 311 system call data, where you can see the increase in dots from 2015 to 2019 is the number of dots of reported flooding events. That's what it looks like across the entire city. So a lot of purple. And that starts to take shape in terms of the number of landslides. So our steep slopes and lush green hillsides are being negatively impacted because of that increase in precipitation, which also increases a lot of the cost in terms of incident response for the local government. And so, similarly to what the Attorney General reported several years ago in terms of the cost of climate change to Pennsylvania's local governments, he's been spot on. And we have seen that number increase in recent years as we have had to spend, effectively what has become an epidemic of its own with regards to landslide mitigation, as well as cleanup and remediation costs. Just to pivot a little bit towards kind of the what's next. So as we have started to see these issues take shape, and as we've gone through kind of the research and engagement and then research and then strategy building phases into implementation, we've done several critical things in terms of altering how we're leveraging our city budget, but also looking about two things that we wanted to present and share with you about kind of expanding both to a regional format, but also thinking about deeper cross-sector collaboration. On the regional front, one of the things that we recently, not so recently now, but after the 2020 election, released as a part of a partnership with the University of Pittsburgh, as well as 8 other cities in the Ohio Valley, is an initiative that we call the Marshall Plan for Middle America, which effectively calls for a large amount of investment, primarily in the energy and infrastructure space, to help address the generational transition that will be required to help create a clean energy economy. And so what we have focused on in that analysis is looking at the 4 states of Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky, and how they are effectively integrated together as a combined regional ecosystem or regional economic ecosystem, and how the role of climate action plays in helping to both re-envision and regenerate that region of the Ohio Valley and Upper Appalachia. And the way that has kind of come to us is we have been partners with a lot of our fellow cities throughout the region on the development of climate action plan strategies or resilience strategies, and city to city networks have been really a potent force for us in terms of sharing ideas with other administrations and learning from each other's challenges. And with this information in hand, what we began to see effectively is that our ideas are not just about reducing emissions and taking action on the climate, but really also about reimagining what our economic system can look like. And so the ability to both take action on climate can also yield job creation and economic development benefit. And so with partnerships with Siemens, for example, was one of our critical partners who helped us develop an analysis called the City Performance Tool. And that City Performance Tool took a lot of the information that you see on the slide here with regards to our strategies related to lower energy consumption, emissions reduction from the transportation system, and then modernizing our energy infrastructure. And effectively using that information, we were able to understand the development of job creation as a result of the advent of these new industries. And so across the 4 states, we estimate that if we do nothing in terms of investing in the clean energy transition, the region will stand to lose about 100,000 jobs over the next decade, primarily in several acute communities that are focused in on the development of the coal and gas industry. However, if we look at the future and start to pivot towards a clean energy ecosystem, we have the opportunity to create upwards of 400,000 jobs across that region over the same period of time. And so helping us do that requires a number of local investment decisions, policies, and practices that can everything that can include electrifying our city fleets and buses, to electrifying our homes and buildings, to creating new financing programs and collaborative investment structures for energy efficiency or infrastructure deployment and renewable energy generation. And so there's this huge upside that we have started to see already just after the release of the plan in terms of coordination from both federal government as well as private sector investors like pension funds and new companies that are and existing companies that are interested in both decarbonization, but also finding new solutions to some of these deep-seated climate challenges. The other place that we have seen is kind of this greater need in terms of cross-sector collaboration. As I had mentioned earlier, the challenges of fragmentation, both between and across sectors of our local governance structures across Pennsylvania, frankly, are one of our primary impediments with regards to encouraging innovation or attracting capital. And so what we have found as one of the key ways to do this is first, we built what we called the Pittsburgh Investment Prospectus, which is, again, if you go back to the early part of the presentation, that identifying along with the community 47 critical projects that could help address and build that resilience, the ability to both address our shocks as well as our stressors in the city. And with that investment prospectus in hand, what we've been able to do is to start to align major investors from hospitals and universities to pension funds and private sector actors to start to align capital around those various initiatives. And so just a few weeks ago, we announced the creation of what we call the ONEPGH Fund, which is, as I mentioned, a 501c3 effort to help to align these investments and to mobilize community capital through cross-sector partnerships. And what we have seen is already at very kind of the early stages of this, the ability to bring resources around initiatives that otherwise by ourselves we would not be able to address. So for example, 3 key projects that we have queued through the fund already have been the creation of a guaranteed income pilot, where we're looking to provide a pilot program that would effectively provide a sampling of residents, a basic income over a 2-year period to help allow them to deal with those shocks and stressors that we deal with in normal life, and help to model that and look at the possibility of expanding it on into the future through various means. We've been able to attract capital to address those challenges like landslides through coordinating the city's greenways program and taking on what are effectively environmental detriments right now because of flooding and poor management practices to potentially being environmental assets. And then the third area that we're keen to focus in on is the issue of energy burden, which is the per capita cost that a household spends on utilities. And we've seen this, acutely through the pandemic, but prior even to the pandemic, where Pittsburgh was one of the top 10 worst cities in the country for energy burden. And so through the pandemic, that issue has gotten worse because of an aging housing stock, because of increased utility consumption. And that has a detriment to both health, physical health, as well as mental health. And so using our equity indicators report, we have focused in on that as being a critical area for us to address to help build human capacity as well as alleviate some of those challenges that Pittsburgh residents are facing. And so, those are just some examples that we wanted to share with you. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions and dive deeper into the conversation with Jonathan and all who is out there. So thank you.
Great stuff, Grant. I'll let you catch your breath here a little bit. And folks, if you'd like to submit questions, please do so down below in the Q&A function. I see one already submitted, but I'll ask you, Grant, maybe to talk a little bit about shocks and stressors. So can you define what each of those are and give some examples that might be relevant to folks all over the state?
Mm-hmm. Certainly. So shocks and stressors, and I should just take a quick step back about resilience. And so resilience is it's not a new term, but it is a term that has, I think, entered into the lexicon more frequently in recent years. And, the concept is really rooted in development psychology, in terms of how do we raise a more resilient child. And so that development psychology is kind of the impetus for the resilience conversation. And what the Rockefeller Foundation and the 100 Resilient Cities Initiative effectively did was say, let's look at this concept of resilience, but look at it across cities. And what was being recognized is being recognized that cities around the world are really at the epicenter of 3 tectonic plates. So you have these challenges of globalization, of urbanization, and climate change. And so these are things that are manifesting themselves, whether you're in Pittsburgh or Lancaster or Manila and, New York City. And so size doesn't necessarily matter in this context. So, we're experiencing globalization, whether that is what has been typically in like the trade or economic space or in a global pandemic. We've been experiencing urbanization, whether that is the flow of people out of cities or the massive influx of people into cities. We are experiencing climate change, whether it's, some of the examples that I showcased here for an inland city like Pittsburgh, or forest fires in California or hurricanes in the Gulf Coast region. And so those are examples of shocks, fires, hurricanes, tornadoes, immediate negative impacts that will happen. They are going to happen. And so there's a whole strand of thought regards to kind of emergency preparedness, right? And thinking about how do we prepare for the next event. But there's also this issue of stressors. And these are those slow-moving challenges that are, effectively exist everywhere And they're the things that we acknowledge. We know that there are problems, but we are able to endure them because they don't disrupt our lives every day. They're just constantly present. And so what you see is that cities, and using this kind of urban systems management framework that we have created, allows us to think about what are those immediate negative threats as well as those stressors, and how do we better kind of think about our operations to prepare for both. And it's an important factor because if you don't address your stressors, many times your stressors could become a shock. And so we've seen that through the pandemic, in terms of the impact of an aging and eroding and lack of disinvestment in a public health system. And so when the pandemic happens, the shock event, we weren't addressing our underlying stressor, and so it makes it difficult to address that immediate event. And so it's this practice that I think we're really at the forefront of as cities, and starting to think about, how do I apply this resilience lens to both policy, to work, to budgeting, to training, and to better understanding as urban professionals how we better manage our cities or local governments.
So essentially, the stressors can make the shocks worse, right?
Exactly.
And so mitigating some of these stressors and addressing some of them definitely make it easier to handle a shock, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So Nelson Longenecker asked a question in our group chat here, talking about the pandemic, and basically, have the last 15 months changed any of your thinking or targets, or creating maybe a new shock category about the pandemic? How has the pandemic affected this work?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the things, and not that we are, Nostradamus or prescient, but one of the things that's been interesting since 2015, when we first created with Rand, and through a number of deliberative community forms that we developed, we've experienced every shock or stress event that we identified. Now, the pandemic, for example, was one of the things that we raised as being a potential issue. It didn't have, and this is maybe some of the lessons learned. It didn't have a high probability, but on the impact level, it was extremely high. Like if there was a pandemic. Right. But we probably looked at that maybe a little differently now, where the probability of a pandemic should have been a lot higher. That said, the work that we were able to do at the local level, given that we had that in our lens, was that we were able to be better prepared for what transpired afterwards. So we began in early January through our EMS services to start to lay out kind of, pandemic response planning when it started to enter into the radar. The challenge that we saw, I think, as local governments goes into that stressor, though, of fragmentation, which is when you have a limited communications and a response from the federal government, that transpires down to the state government, which transpires down to the local government. So there's only so much that you could do at any one level of government, and really calls for those needs for coordinating structures, which is ultimately one of the biggest lessons of resilience, is the power of networking.
Right.
And so those networks, when those synapses fire together, that's when you have the greatest probability of ultimately building resilience.
And it's interesting. You talked about air quality as being a big issue in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, and Lancaster County and Allegheny County, I think, go back and forth on having the worst air quality in the state. So we certainly feel the pain of that here. And your regional approach to that is really interesting and refreshing, because I think it's with the way wind patterns, climate patterns work, it's tough to really necessarily control your own geographic location air quality with some of that. So that speaks to this connection, building connections with communities around you, just extremely important stuff. A question here from Stacy Reidenbaugh, who I think you might know with 10,000 Friends of Pennsylvania. And if any of you haven't checked out the Listening to Lancaster session with Stacy Reidenbaugh, you may do so on the Hourglass website. I had a great conversation with her. Thanks for this question here, Stacy. She says, "Hi, Grant. Thank you for presenting today." Ditto. Resilience is a critical effort that that many cities should be considering and monumental for a city the size of Pittsburgh. For municipal officials who are considering starting on this journey or expecting their resiliency strategy today, what is the first step they should take?
Yeah, a great question. And thank you, Stacy. And full disclosure, I'm a 10,000 Friends of Pennsylvania alumni, so everything I learned there is applied here. It's a good question. And one of the things I think that's really interesting about like our 100 Resilient Cities network is it literally spanned the gamut. So like we have, mega cities like New York and London that were part of the network. But we also had cities like Pittsburgh at 300,000 people, but also cities like Vejle, Denmark, which I never knew existed. And many people never knew Pittsburgh existed either, when you think beyond our borders. And Vejle is a great example of a city that's about 60,000 people. So, by our Pennsylvania context, that's a small to mid-sized city. And so what really I think is the basis is taking that shock and stressor approach. So the first step of really developing that preliminary resilience assessment is a critical task because it requires you to look in the mirror as a community and say what's wrong. I always called it like the 6 o'clock in the morning look in the mirror, like what happened last night, before you splash some water in your face or, brush your teeth. And so it's that look that you start to get a better understanding of where you need to improve and what are the physical as well as the human challenges that a community exists. And that's something that can scale no matter what size the community is. It really requires, I think, the taking that initiative and intent. And then also I would add to having a team or a person plus a team inside of a local government that is charged with kind of focusing on these issues. And so, before I took my current position as Chief Resilience Officer, there was maybe 15 or 20 Chief Resilience Officers in the world. And so it's a relatively new concept, but it's effectively a person, and it can look different in different places. But like for us, it was really, my role has become one of being an integrator. And so not just thinking about one bespoke issue, but how do all these issues and departments start to work together in order to address common challenges, but also leverage resources. And so this concept I mentioned of co-benefits is really critical to that. And having somebody that could have the agility in an organization to do so is really important.
Do you think it makes sense to have that person reside within the planning department or close or have a good relationship with the planning department as you do?
Yeah, so in my role, it's kind of metastasized a little bit over time in that I think you need to have somebody that has access and exposure and engagement within the executive branch, but also the ability to be in a department to understand kind of the operational side, as well as kind of the deployment. So, when I first started at the City of Pittsburgh, I began in the mayor's office and having kind of a remit within the mayor's office, and then became part of our management team within our Department of Innovation and Performance, where we've incubated this, our work, and then now, more formally integrated in the Department of City Planning. And so, it's in that phase, if I think about this, we started as an executive initiative, piloted it in an innovation department, and then we're now working on, effectively integrating it and institutionalizing that work into the standards of operations for city government.
Great. Thanks for that question again, Stacy. Robert Smith has questioned Bob Smith. 47 critical projects is a lot. What are the top 3 to 5 you're focusing on initially, or are the core of your effort? Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, it's also a good question. I know 47 is a lot. As you know, it's also difficult to get mayors and council people to agree on any one initiative, and so that is effectively what I would call the basket of initiatives that were identified as being, if we did this, we will help that, right? And so the areas that we've been able to focus on thus far, I think this goes to one of your earlier questions. The pandemic has really helped us, and that's maybe a bad phrase, but the pandemic has led us towards more targeted priorities. So those issues of basic income, of energy burden, and access to open space were things that we had in that 47, in the basket. But what we felt and came to understand through the pandemic at those really critical challenges of providing, direct cash assistance to people that need it most in terms of both their physical vulnerability, but as well as, kind of those issues of equity, justice, and economic opportunity. That's the pandemic has, we've known that through our resilience assessment, right? But has exposed it and made it clear as day where those investments can be made. Likewise, energy burden is something that we knew prior to, or access to open space and the value, and both from a public as well as personal health benefit that open space provides us and green space provides us, is really mission critical, as well as kind of addressing those issues of energy burden or fuel poverty. So that clarity has given us the ability to start to target resources and raise capital in those spaces.
Great. Kate DeHaven Freund has a question here. How was ONEPGH fund introduced, marketed to the various Pittsburgh nonprofits with overlapping missions? Great question.
Yeah, really terrific question. So one of the impetuses for the ONEPGH fund is, and I know folks in Lancaster know this well, every city in the Commonwealth understands the challenges between local government and nonprofit institutions, and that we have a symbiotic relationship, but sometimes it becomes strained. And so when we talk about the Pittsburgh Way, this was one of the critical challenges that we saw in terms of figuring out a path forward where the new eds and meds economy could, concurrently help address the civic challenges that we all face in a statewide funding construct that doesn't allow them to do that at great scale, or allow the local government to do it at great scale with regards to forms of taxation. And so what the ONEPGH fund does is provide us a vehicle that allows those resources to be joined together to help address those common civic challenges in a way that before, frankly, were one-off initiatives. And so this gives us a foothold to start to do that. So that's part of the innovation that we've been able to express both to those investors, that it's in their vested self-interest to help advance the benefits of the community, but also to strengthen the local government as well.
Question here from Jess King, who is the chief of staff to Mayor Sirachi here in Lancaster. Grant seems to know Jess. Said, hi, Grant. A lot of issues you are focused on aren't just local government interests. How have you leveraged other layers of government, state and federal?
Before I answer that question, is that the Jess King from Union Project fame?
I think so. Yes.
That's awesome. Hi, Jess. So addressing like the state and federal intersections, this is a good point to connect with our Marshall Plan effort. And so one of the things that we saw in collaboration with our other cities was these common challenges. So like, what I shared in a slide deck here, somebody from Morgantown, West Virginia, or Cincinnati, Ohio, or Louisville, Kentucky could share something very similar. Likewise, the city of Lancaster could do the same. And so we're in this boat together as communities trying to figure out how to operationalize this in a new operating environment. So local government infrastructure needs are still based primarily on not even a 20th century paradigm, but some cases a 19th century paradigm. And so as we've started to think about these roads together, the federal government and state government becomes a critical partner in helping to advance the needs of infrastructure, both the social safety net as well as the physical infrastructure needs. And so finding ways in which to help, show what that need is kind of the primary component. Second is building that capacity at the local level to both activate and access those resources. And the third is to start to connect those private sector resources that can also help be a major contributor. One good example with that has been, this is a totally separate presentation but a good example has been, we've utilized the creation of an ESG framework for our pension fund. And, that first started out as a method or an objective for us to divest our pension fund from fossil fuels. But leveraging an ESG lens, incorporating the SDGs into that decision making has helped us shift our procurement practices with regards to those security assets. That's the divest side, like shifting where we're putting capital. Now we're starting to have those conversations about the invest side, which is how do you bring capital from pension funds like labor pension funds, for example, into the housing space, into the infrastructure space, so that you can start to create, guided community investments that are otherwise going to Wall Street or investing in, Singapore instead of in our own backyard where we can use the resources just as much.
Great. Great question there. The last question we'll get to today is from another one from Stacy Reidenbaugh. Can you talk a little bit more about how you engage the community in the early process of these goals?
Yeah, one of the big tools that we utilized was called deliberative forums, and a partnership with the Carnegie Mellon's Center for Deliberative Democracy. And if you've never participated in a deliberative forum, it's kind of I would describe it as the exact opposite of a New England town hall, where you have one person step up to a mic and people in the audience and everyone yells at the people that are sitting up on a stage. The deliberative forum format requires you to set people into small working groups, and in many cases they may have and probably have divergent viewpoints, and are given a set of information and criteria and have to, effectively debate and deliberate amongst each other to formulate a consensus point. And so it was those intimate types of conversations that we were able to have in a variety of locations around the city that allowed us to, effectively extract this information, as well as kind of, your standard statistical data and understanding where issues are. But that format, I think, was really helpful for us, one, to identify community leaders and people that may not traditionally be engaged in the public process, and allowed them to express their viewpoints. And so it allowed for, a greater amount of diversity and inclusion in the development of the public conversation. That's been something that obviously through the pandemic has been really difficult not to replicate, because we lost the meeting after the meeting.
Right.
And so we've helped to supplement that with more public engagement via online forums, which has been helpful, but still doesn't build like those human relationships that you get in the meetings after the meetings, which in some cases are more important than the meeting itself. But we were able to do that work, obviously pre-pandemic, that was super helpful.
Excellent. Well, Grant, I can't thank you enough for taking time today. We've got a couple of announcements here that will run for till the end of our time, but Grant, appreciate you taking time. I learned a lot. I hope everybody else did too. I think that, while this is Grant represents what's happened in Pittsburgh, I do think that this has tremendous implications for the rest of the state, and especially in the Lancaster community. We do a lot of this stuff already, but it might be under different frameworks, different names, different vocabulary used, but I think it's important. So appreciate you taking time, Grant.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. And thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. And Stacy and Jess, good to see or hear you guys too. So thanks a lot, and happy to be a resource for friends in Lancaster.
Thanks, Grant. All right, I'm going to allow Monty Milner to talk here. He's going to join us as a panelist. And let's see if he will be joining us soon. It's freezing on me, I think. Okay. If anybody in the chat can tell me if what you see, because I just see me framed frozen here. You can see me. Okay. There's Monty coming through here. Gonna get him starting video here. Excellent. Thanks, Stacy, for letting me know.
Am I available now?
We can hear you, Monty.
Okay, you don't need to see me. I don't know how this works. Just for a moment, this is Jonathan's last official meeting and performance for Hourglass. And so, Jonathan, I'd like to take this moment to thank you for what you've done for Hourglass and for the Lancaster community. We wish you the best as you're in the process of moving now to Pittsburgh. We particularly thank you for, you've been the executive director of Hourglass since February of 2019. Just to point out a few things for those of you that aren't familiar with it. Jonathan, we started out in the first summer with Jonathan thinking about how we could expand our First Friday forums in the Ware Center to communicate with individuals who could not make the 12 o'clock forum. And then the pandemic occurred, and Jonathan led us to the Zoom forums that we're using today and we'll use until the Ware Center opens up. And when that happens, we'll have a combined version of the in-person we had before, but keep all the Zoom things that Jonathan's helped us with. That's one thing that's been very fortunate for us. A second assignment we gave Jonathan when he started was to develop our website. And he led the development of the website. Not only did he do the classic website that was so essential for any organization, but he also worked with Jennifer Mundy to produce a gigantic library of over 20 years of research and positions that Hourglass has studied that are available to anyone in the community now that has a subject they'd like to work on and would like enhanced information. Can just go to our website and get it to make their life a little quicker and easier on what they want to accomplish. And in addition, he expanded just the third thing. Keeping Lancaster Current was expanded under Jonathan to include interviews with community leaders. And this, in a whole variety of ways, we were able to present to the community what's going on. That gave some people, first, information of what's happening. Secondly, hopefully a few people would join up and want to participate in the project. And a third was, it showed that in Lancaster, we're addressing serious problems with capable people, and we're making real progress and what that does is give a positive image that's deserved of the people that are working to make Lancaster a better place to live and work. And we think that's becoming contagious, Jonathan, and we appreciate what you've done. Again, thank you for everything and best wishes on behalf of Hourglass and the community.
Thank you, Monty. It's really been an honor to work with you all at the Hourglass and also with the Lancaster community. Just getting to know folks and learning about the wonderful work you all do here has just been a complete honor. for me, and humbling to be able to work with the folks at the Hourglass in the last 2.5 years. So appreciate it. I am sending in the chat my personal email address. Feel free to reach out to me at any time if you have questions. I will do my best to get back to you. Thanks again for all of your support for Hourglass. Due to my departure, July, we typically don't have a forum in July, but there will not be a forum. And hopefully Hourglass will start back up in August. And there might be a new me, Jonathan 2.0, that will be able to help you out in August. We're not sure yet, but it's exciting work. So appreciate everybody taking time today. Thanks so much to Grant if he's still on here. Appreciate everybody here, and Monty for your wonderful kind words. So thanks everybody, and have a wonderful weekend.